Why the most foolish people end up in power. Machiavelli knew this. It is necessary for a prince who wishes to maintain his position to learn how not to be good, and to use this knowledge or not to use it according to necessity. Niccolò Machiavelli. Have you ever looked at someone in a position of power and thought, how on earth did they get there? We've all seen it, individuals who seem thoroughly incompetent rising to positions of authority while more capable people remain in the shadows. Think of history's Emperor Nero, fiddling while Rome burned, or more recently, corporate figures like Elizabeth Holmes, who built a multi-billion-dollar company on technology that never worked. This pattern is so common, it feels deliberate. But what if it is? What if there's a disturbing logic behind why the least qualified often end up with the most influence? Today, we're diving into the insights of one of history's most misunderstood political philosophers, Niccolò Machiavelli, and his brutal observations about why stupidity and power so often go hand in hand. This isn't just ancient philosophy, it's a psychological reality that still shapes modern leadership, from corporate boardrooms to the highest offices of government. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes being intelligent is exactly what prevents people from gaining power. And understanding this paradox may be the key to recognizing the manipulative dynamics around us, or even navigating your own path to influence. In 16th century Florence, exiled from the political life he cherished, Machiavelli wrote what would become one of the most controversial political treatises in history, The Prince. Unlike idealistic philosophers before him, Machiavelli wasn't concerned with how rulers should behave in a perfect world. He was focused on how power actually works in the real one. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. This quote captures the heart of Machiavelli's thinking. He understood that perception often matters more than reality when it comes to acquiring and maintaining power. And here lies the first clue to our paradox. Appearing competent is often more important than actually being competent. Machiavelli observed that rulers who display too much intelligence often create trouble for themselves. Why? Because intelligence often comes with traits that are liabilities in power struggles, traits like nuance, ethics, and self-awareness. Consider what happens when a genuinely intelligent person enters a power structure. They see complexity where others crave simplicity. They acknowledge limitations where others make sweeping promises. They question themselves while others project certainty. In environments where bold assertion trumps careful deliberation, these intellectual virtues become strategic disadvantages. Think about Socrates, the philosopher who questioned everything and was ultimately sentenced to death by the Athenian democracy. His wisdom, "I know that I know nothing," made him a philosophical legend, but a political failure. In contrast, populist leaders throughout history have succeeded by offering clear, confident, and often simplistic answers. Many have risen by claiming they alone possess all the solutions. A controversial 2016 study from the Journal of Management explored this very idea. It found that intelligence correlates positively with leadership effectiveness, but only up to an IQ of around 120. Beyond that, higher intelligence actually became a hindrance to leadership emergence. The study suggested that exceptionally intelligent individuals struggle to connect with others who can't follow their complex reasoning. That's right. Being too smart might actually keep you out of leadership positions in the first place. Whether or not you fully accept that study's conclusion, it forces us to reconsider what kind of intelligence truly helps people gain power. But raw intelligence isn't the only factor. If intelligence can be a liability in power games, then what qualities actually help people climb the ladder? This leads us to a powerful psychological principle that explains why we so often follow the wrong people. Have you ever noticed how the loudest voice in the room often becomes the most influential regardless of what that voice is actually saying? This isn't coincidence. It's deeply rooted in our psychology. In the 1990s, psychologists David Dunning and Justin-Kruger identified what's now known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias where people with limited knowledge dramatically overestimate their competence, while true experts, aware of how much they don't know, tend to underestimate theirs. As Shakespeare put it, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." And that, perhaps, is the deepest irony of power. It often belongs not to the wisest, but to those least aware of their own ignorance. Shakespeare captured this principle centuries before psychology gave it a name. But Machiavelli would have recognized it immediately as a fundamental truth about power dynamics. Modern research confirms this bias operates in leadership contexts. A 2020 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals who displayed overconfidence were more likely to be perceived as leaders by their peers, regardless of their actual competence. The appearance of certainty was more persuasive than demonstrated expertise. Consider figures like George Armstrong Custer, whose supreme confidence led to catastrophic military decisions, yet earned him rapid promotions and devoted followers. Or look at the tech industry, where founders who speak in absolute visionary terms often secure massive funding over more measured, experienced entrepreneurs. WeWork's Adam Neumann exemplified this. Despite a shaky business model, his unshakable confidence helped him attract billions in investment and build a cult-like following. This pattern repeats globally. Japan's Masayoshi Son of SoftBank lost $70 billion on failed investments while maintaining investor confidence through sheer force of personality. Russia's oligarchs rose not through competence, but through connections and boldness during post-Soviet privatization. Singapore, by contrast, implemented safeguards specifically designed to prevent confidence from trumping competence in leadership selection. In 2012, researchers from Stanford and the University of Houston found that narcissism, not competence, may be the strongest predictor of who emerges as a leader in unstructured groups. Interestingly, the groups led by narcissists didn't perform better. They simply believed they did. Why does this happen? Our brains use mental shortcuts when evaluating others. Confidence signals competence. Decisiveness suggests clarity of thought. These cognitive heuristics served our ancestors well in more straightforward environments, but become problematic in today's complex world, where true expertise often involves acknowledging uncertainty. This confidence illusion helps explain how incompetent individuals might initially rise to power. But there's something even more insidious that allows them to entrench their position across entire organizations: the deliberate cultivation of institutionalized incompetence. Machiavelli observed something crucial about power structures. Incompetent leaders tend to surround themselves with even less competent subordinates. In The Prince, Machiavelli wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." He understood that weak leaders often select weaker allies to ensure they never face a credible threat to their authority. This creates a cascading effect where incompetence becomes institutionalized. Dr. Thomas Chamorro Premuzic, an organizational psychologist, describes this phenomenon as competence threatening. Insecure leaders feel endangered by capable team members who might expose their flaws or eventually replace them. Instead of selecting for talent, they select for loyalty and personalities that won't challenge them. Think of it as a competence drought that spreads outward from central leadership. In Emperor Commodus's court, Competent administrators were replaced by flatterers and entertainers, accelerating Rome's decline. In contemporary Brazil, the Centrone political system institutionalizes this dynamic, where political appointees secure power through personal connections rather than demonstrated merit. Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe followed a similar pattern. In his later years, Mugabe systematically replaced capable administrators with partisan loyalists, leading to devastating economic consequences. This dynamic creates what organizational scientists call homophily, the tendency of individuals to associate with those similar to themselves. In power structures, this means incompetent leaders create islands of incompetence around them, insulated from diverse viewpoints and immune to constructive criticism. Ask yourself, have you ever worked in an organization where questioning decisions was discouraged? Where raising concerns was viewed as disloyal or not being a team player? These are symptoms of this network effect in action. Yet even knowing all this, we continue to find ourselves drawn to leaders who offer simplistic answers. This vulnerability helps explain why incompetence continues to thrive despite our best intentions. Why do we often choose leaders who offer easy solutions to complex problems? The answer lies in cognitive psychology and our fundamental desire for certainty in a chaotic world. Real expertise rarely sounds certain. It is accompanied by nuance, caveats, and a deep awareness of complexity. The uncomfortable truth is that genuine experts usually admit what they don't know. As Machiavelli foresaw and modern science confirms, the perception of competence rather than actual ability frequently determines who rises to power. And once in power, the incompetent often surround themselves with loyal mediocrity, creating echo chambers where dissent is eliminated and bad decisions multiply. The cycle continues, not because people are ignorant, but because the psychological architecture of human decision-making favors the confident over the competent. They recognize complexity. They acknowledge trade-offs. But these intellectual virtues can be profoundly unsatisfying to our psychological needs. For the great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances as though they were realities, and are often more influenced by the things that seem than by those that are. When Machiavelli wrote these words, he identified something fundamental about human psychology. We crave certainty even when certainty isn't possible or realistic. Consider what happens in times of crisis or uncertainty. People rarely rally behind the leader who says, "This is a complex situation with no easy answers that will require careful thought and inevitable trade-offs." Instead, they follow the person confidently proclaiming, "I alone can fix this." The solution is simple. Look at how actual environmental scientists speak about climate change. With careful caveats, ranges of possibilities, and nuanced policy recommendations, versus how popular figures on both sides frame the issue with absolute certainty. The scientific approach, while intellectually honest, struggles to compete with the psychological comfort of simple narratives. Or consider healthcare debates. Real medical experts acknowledge difficult trade-offs in any system, while political figures promise ideal outcomes with no downsides. Which message typically wins public support? The simple, certain one regardless of feasibility. In a particularly revealing 2017 experiment, Yale researchers uncovered something disturbing about how we process political information. When participants were given mathematically complex policy scenarios, their ability to interpret the data accurately was influenced by whether the results aligned with their political beliefs. Even more alarming, those with the highest math skills showed the most bias. They used their intelligence not to find the truth, but to defend their preferred conclusions. Cognitive psychologists call this cognitive closure. our desire for definitive answers rather than ongoing ambiguity. Studies show that when people feel threatened or uncertain, their need for closure increases sharply. They become more drawn to black and white thinking and more likely to support authoritarian leaders who project unwavering certainty. This creates a dangerous dynamic. The more complex and frightening the world becomes, the more vulnerable we are to simplistic explanations and to leaders who exploit that vulnerability. It's a kind of psychological immune system failure. Precisely when we most need nuance, we become most likely to abandon it. Ask yourself, have you ever found yourself drawn to an explanation simply because it was clear and definitive, even when a part of you suspected the truth was more complicated? That's this principle at work inside your own mind. While our psychological comfort with simplicity explains much of this dynamic, there's an even more troubling layer to consider, one that shows why intelligence alone is not enough to resist manipulation. And here is where Machiavelli becomes truly unsettling. He suggested that moral considerations often handicap intelligent people in power struggles. In what might be his most infamous passage, Machiavelli wrote, "It is necessary for a prince who wishes to maintain his position to learn how not to be good and to use this knowledge, or not to use it according to necessity." While intelligent people typically develop more complex moral reasoning, this can actually impede their ability to compete for power against those unburdened by such considerations. In any competitive environment, the person willing to cross ethical lines has access to strategies that morally constrained competitors do not. They can make promises they have no intention of keeping. They can undermine rivals through deception. They can exploit fears and prejudices others refuse to touch. Consider the contrasting fates of Cicero versus Julius Caesar in ancient Rome. Cicero, brilliant and principled, ultimately lost the power struggle to Caesar, who had no qualms about crossing the Rubicon, literally and figuratively breaking norms his opponents felt bound to respect. In modern contexts, we see ethical candidates struggle against opponents who use deception and character assassination without hesitation. In organizational environments, researchers at the University of British Columbia found that psychopathic traits like lack of empathy were positively associated with rapid advancement when combined with social charm. This pattern appears cross-culturally, from China's Shenu ruthless businesswoman archetype to Nordic companies, where studies show that despite cultural emphasis on collaboration, manipulative leaders often outpace their more ethical peers in advancement speed. This creates what game theorists call a race to the bottom. When unethical tactics prove effective, others feel pressured to adopt similar strategies just to remain competitive. Over time, this can transform entire systems, making unethical behavior the norm rather than the exception. Understanding these dark dynamics might make the situation seem hopeless. But not all environments equally reward incompetence and unethical behavior. By identifying the conditions that favor the rise of such individuals, we can begin to design systems that reward genuine merit instead. Machiavelli understood that different environments reward different qualities. Some contexts naturally select for competence, while others allow incompetence to flourish. What determines which environment develops? Several structural factors. First, feedback loops and accountability structures. In environments where decisions have immediate and measurable consequences, incompetence is quickly exposed. Consider a surgeon whose patients consistently die, or a bridge engineer whose designs collapse. These professions naturally select for real competence, because failure is visible and severe. But in environments where feedback is delayed, distorted, or easily manipulated, incompetence can thrive indefinitely. Political systems, where poor outcomes are blamed on predecessors or external factors. Corporate hierarchies, where results are masked by creative accounting. Media ecosystems, where entertainment often outweighs truth. These are breeding grounds for the rise of the incompetent. Second, institutional design and power distribution. When power is concentrated in unaccountable hands, the incentives for ethical or competent behavior collapse. Centralized power systems with weak checks and balances create conditions where incompetence flourishes. The Soviet Union's collapse was accelerated by a system that concentrated decision-making in unaccountable hands. Conversely, Germany's dual-board corporate governance structure, which separates management from oversight, provides structural resistance to incompetent leadership. Third, information asymmetry and complexity. When success is easily measured and compared, merit tends to win. But when goals are ambiguous or success is subjectively evaluated, style often trumps substance. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see you, to few to come in touch with you. What Machiavelli recognized here is that most people evaluate others based on surface impressions rather than deep understanding, especially in complex domains where few have the expertise to make informed judgments. Fourth, economic incentive structures. Systems that reward short-term performance over long-term outcomes create fertile ground for incompetent leadership with superficial charm. The 2008 financial crisis exemplified how incentive structures that prioritized immediate profits regardless of risk fostered leadership that emphasized appearance over substance. Ask yourself, in your own life, which environmental factors promote competence and which enable incompetence to thrive. Understanding these structural forces can help you navigate your own path and recognize when systems are vulnerable to manipulation. Even in well-designed systems, incompetent leaders can still rise by employing specific psychological tactics that allow them to manipulate perception and neutralize opposition. Incompetent leaders don't maintain power by accident. They use deliberate psychological strategies to solidify their position. Tactics Machiavelli would have recognized immediately. First, they exploit tribalism and identity politics by creating clear in-groups and out-groups. They transform substantive criticism into perceived attacks from enemies. This shields them from accountability while strengthening their supporters' emotional investment. Psychologists call this identity fusion. When a leader successfully links their personal identity to a group's identity, challenging the leader feels like an attack on the group itself and, by extension, on the followers' own identities. Consider how cult leaders like Jim Jones or authoritarian figures throughout history cultivated us versus them mentalities. In Malaysia, former Prime Minister Najib Razak exploited ethnic divisions to maintain power despite widespread corruption scandals. Brazil's political polarization under Jair Bolsonaro showed how tribal identity can override factual reality. Second, they leverage cognitive load and information overwhelm by constantly generating chaos, crises, and controversies. Incompetent leaders flood the public sphere with distraction. When we're busy processing an endless stream of outrages, we have little mental energy left for critical analysis or organized resistance. Third, they employ what George Orwell called doublethink, the ability to hold contradictory beliefs simultaneously. By frequently shifting positions and rewriting history, they create an environment where truth feels subjective and accountability becomes impossible. No do darituant. The vulgar crowd always is taken by appearances, and the world consists chiefly of the vulgar. When Machiavelli wrote these words, he wasn't expressing contempt for ordinary people. He was acknowledging a psychological vulnerability we all share. Our cognitive architecture evolved for a simpler world, which makes us more susceptible to manipulation in complex modern information environments. Fourth, they exploit economic precarity and systemic vulnerabilities. When people are struggling financially or feel uncertain about their future, they become more vulnerable to leaders who promise simple solutions to complex problems. In post-industrial regions around the world, economic anxiety creates fertile ground for incompetent leadership that offers convenient scapegoats rather than honest analysis. Consider your own media consumption. How often do you find yourself chasing the latest outrage instead of focusing on deeper, more consequential issues? That's this principle at work. Recognizing these dark patterns is essential, but not enough. We need concrete strategies to protect ourselves and our communities from their influence. At the individual level, awareness is our first line of defense. By understanding the hidden forces that shape thought, we become less susceptible to them. This defense rests on three essential practices. First, we must cultivate intellectual humility, the ability to recognize the limits of what we know. Research shows that intellectually humble people are better at evaluating ideas based on evidence, not confidence. Intellectual humility functions like a cognitive immune system. It helps us resist manipulation and false certainty, just as our physical immune system protects us from infection. Second, we need to develop media literacy, the skill of discerning depth from spectacle. This means deliberately choosing information sources, questioning presentation, and filtering for quality over quantity. Warren Buffett once said, "Really successful people say no to almost everything." Apply that to information. Wise thinkers reject most noise and focus on clarity and insight. Third, we should embrace philosophical reflection. The practice of stepping back from the daily storm to examine deeper principles. Ancient Stoics recommended daily reflection to guard against emotional reactivity. In Bacon's words, "The wise man will make more opportunities than he finds." Reflection empowers us to become active agents in shaping our mental environment, not just passive consumers of it. At the collective level, institutional design is critical. Systems can be structured to reduce bias, deception, and incompetence. Here, too, three pillars emerge. First, we need robust accountability mechanism structures that deliver honest feedback regardless of a leader's charm or persuasive power. Contrast a company with an independent board to one where the board rubber stamps executive decisions. The Boeing 737 MAX crisis revealed what happens when engineers' concerns are ignored in favor of profits. Accountability was absent, and tragedy followed. Second, institutions must foster cognitive diversity. The inclusion of differing perspectives in decision-making. Diverse teams aren't just socially desirable, they're empirically more accurate. They challenge assumptions and reduce blind spots that homogeneous groups tend to miss. Third, we must enforce transparency rules that prevent complexity from becoming a shield for incompetence. Sunshine laws in government or conflict of interest disclosures in medicine make it harder to hide behind jargon or secrecy. Education ties these threads together. It's not enough to teach technical skills. We must prioritize critical thinking and ethical reasoning. Athens created the academy. Florence nurtured the humanists. Great civilizations don't just teach, they cultivate wisdom. So ask yourself, in your community, which of these protections are present? Which are absent? And if we redesigned our systems around competence, humility, and truth, what kind of world might we create? As we reach the end of this exploration, we return to the man who inspired it. What would Machiavelli say about our modern predicament? Machiavelli has been misunderstood for centuries. He wasn't advocating for the dark patterns he described. He was exposing them. By understanding how power actually works, rather than how we wish it worked, he believed we could create better systems of governance. It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. This profound observation reminds us that authority itself deserves no inherent respect. Power must be earned through worthy use, regardless of who holds it. The intersection of Machiavellian political philosophy and modern psychology reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature and social systems. But uncomfortable truths are precisely what we need if we hope to create better futures. The path forward isn't pretending these dynamics don't exist. It's understanding them deeply enough to transcend them. It's designing systems that account for human vulnerabilities rather than exploiting them. It's developing personal practices that strengthen our resistance to manipulation. Most importantly, it's recognizing that while stupidity may sometimes gain power, intelligence coupled with moral courage remains our best hope for creating societies where merit truly matters. What dynamics have you noticed in your own communities? Have you seen instances where these patterns played out? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this exploration valuable, consider subscribing and sharing with others who might benefit from these insights. Until next time, remember, understanding the darkness doesn't mean surrendering to it. It means gaining the power to create light.